Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Fusebox. Today we're going to set up FormLab, which is a FHIR Structured Data Capture laboratory. And we're going to demo it and see how you can make it useful for yourselves. First, what's Fusebox anyway? So Fusebox is essentially a podcast channel that gives you some short practical tutorials that you can reproduce to get up and running with FHIR services quickly. It's the idea that you already know something about computers, you already know APIs, you already know tooling and tools, you can find your way around operating systems, but FHIR is new to you. The name for Fusebox is essentially a little nod towards the Spark Accelerator in Australia, where start new ideas so they spark and create a fire. And Fusebox is something that contains those sparks. So what do we want to do today in the next 15 minutes? We want to spin up the FHIR SDC lab, and we're going to use Docker for that. We're going to make sure that we've got some sample data loaded. The system should do that for us. We're going to launch a smart form, which is an implementation of the FHIR SDC standard using a simulated hospital system or EHR simulator. Then we're going to fill in a specific Australian form, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health check, and specifically the version that checks for cardiovascular disease risks. I'm going to show you how one of the sections can be made dynamic, and we're going to look at the results we've saved. Now, briefly, the setup and prerequisites to get the whole lab running. So you have to have Docker and Docker Compose on your system. You don't need to install Docker Compose separately these days. It is included in the Docker package. You need the Git version control system, and you need a browser that can run JavaScript and otherwise your operating system terminal or command line. If you have heard of FHIR previously, that's an advantage. What are the things we're going to see under the hood? Well, there is a number of containers that spin up in the composition. So we will have a home page called the Docs Hub, which comes up on port 80. We will have a HAPI FHIR server, which runs on port 8080. We will have the launcher for the forms, the hospital system, on port 81. The smart form service itself on port 82. And then because the information in the launcher is secured, but the HAPI FHIR server is not secured, we need an adapter. So that's what the smart proxy does. It sits between the smart forms, the smart launcher, and the HAPI FHIR server to mitigate the security differences that the smart standard brings. HAPI FHIR doesn't have persistence itself. It stores its information in a Postgres database. That's nothing that we will directly be dealing with. And finally, there is a container that is essentially a job that runs on the start, which loads the samples. So let's set this up using the command line. We will clone the requisite repository. We will start the services and then we'll verify that this works. The first step will be to clone the repository. And before we do that, I want to say something about what type of repository that is. So this is a very small repository known as a GitLab snippet. Those are repositories that have up to 9 files and a little bit of a markdown page around them. And they don't actually sit as a full repository, but they sit within another project. In this case, it's sitting within the FormLab project. So you see that the path leads us to the actual project, which is here, called FormLab, and then there's a subdirectory snippets, which contains all these little repositories, and then there is an identifier, which is system-made, so it doesn't have any significance. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out this little snippet from inside the FormLab project and go into it and have a look what it is. So welcome to Annapurna. You see I've already made a directory temp fusebox, which is for my fusebox samples. And I'm now going to recall the line that I had used before. That's not working. That's interesting. Okay, then I need to type it in. So welcome to Annapurna's shell. That's my little computer here. I've already made a directory home temp fusebox for all my fusebox samples. And because I'm a terrible typist, I'm going to paste in the string for cloning, and I suggest you do the same because it's really long. So we're going to go and clone this, and you don't need any authentication. This is a public repository. Good. Now let's change into this and have a quick look at what's there. So we see that there are two green marked executable files, a Docker Compose file which tells us what bits are in it, and some other example files. So not a whole lot. The next step we have to do is to start the system, and as I already mentioned, there's these two files that look suspicious towards this purpose. So we're just going to use the one that's called up and see what happens. Okay, so let's go up and we'll see what happens. So you can see all the images being pulled. That will take a while. I'm on a fast network. You may need to have some patience. The good news is that this only needs to happen once. After that, you will have the containers unless you feel you need to update them for some reason. They vary quite a bit in size. So you see the launcher and HAPI are quite big, while Postgres is really small and optimized. This is also a good time to see how linking affects the performance of a container. So while the HAPI server is large, it pulls together immediately, and the launcher has many layers. So linking them takes a fair bit of time in the Docker daemon. Okay, so now the containers are created and they should be running. So let's have a look at how we're going to check that they actually do what we want to do them. So these are the commands we're going to use. So we're going to use docker compose logs commands and look at the output of the add samples container, which is the job that inserts the samples. And then in case there is anything wrong, we could use the ps command to see the state of the containers, so if it's not started or failed for some reason. Okay. Docker compose, logs, add samples. And there we see successful update as create coming from the HAPI server, which tells us that the bundle that contains all the reference information has been inserted effectively. So let's just clear that. We will not need the docker ps command because everything is working as expected. Right, let's now have a look at the various things that this package contains. And I'm going to use a browser in incognito mode to make sure that there are no cookies or other settings influencing the demo. So the first location we want to visit is the basic local host. And that gives us a home page with some documentation. I'm just going to see if I can enlarge that a little bit. So that's probably a bit better to see. So here are the services, the other services that we're going to discuss, but I want to talk about the rest of the page. So I've written this page. If you want any improvements, look at the author, and there you can see how you can reach me. It's part of the Formlab project, so you can also go to the project directly, which is basically those few files that you just saw. Good, let's have a look at the other components that are put in here. So this is the simulated hospital system that we're going to use. This is the server that serves the forms up, and you see it says responses not available, app not launched via Smart. That's because we need to go through that simulated hospital system to create the security context that allows it to write to the server. At the moment, it can only read. And then later on, we're going to go and visit the FHIR server itself. Here is a user interface that comes with it, and we're going to use that user interface to inspect the results. Good. So that's what you have. If you want to read anything about the architecture or such, there's plenty in the user guide and developer information to have. Next, we're going to launch the SmartForms EHR simulator. We're going to use first a user of the hospital system called Mr. Representative Pharmacist. And later we're going to set the patient to Mrs. SmartForm. And then we're going to launch the forms. So Mr. Representative Pharmacist is here. So I'm the user. I'm now Mr. Representative Pharmacist. And I'm looking for my patient, which is Mrs. Electronic Request Form. And now you see at the top, the context is set for me, the user, and I'm treating the patient, Mrs. Electronic Request Form. There could be other context bits. This system allows to have the encounter and a further FHIR context setting. We're not using that for this demo. Across the top bar, you can see some of these items shown. These are just queries to the FHIR server. Okay. Now, using that link, we've started the SmartForms server. And we've said that we're going to use the Torres Strait, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health check, and we're going to use the cardiovascular version. So let's create a response. Now this pulls the form out of the FHIR server and paints it for us. So we can now go through the different effects. You see that Mrs. Electronic Request Form, that her data has been pulled into this, and you will find the various fields that pertain to her as much as you can pre-filled in, which is the major time saver of these electronic forms. So we've already gone through step 5, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health check. Now what we want to do is to see how dynamic forms can be used. And we're just going to have one specific example, but you can imagine how you could make more complicated ones from this. We're going to select the social and emotional well-being form, subform. And then for the stressful life events, you see this has not been selected. If you say yes, a details dialog pops up. You say no, the field is hidden. And you can imagine that there would be whole subforms, conditional on various things that could use such a mechanism. So data in the form elsewhere can determine whether a subform is shown or hidden, making the flow for the user for the information that we actually have to cover, apart from the one that's pre-filled, much shorter. The next thing we will do is we will submit the form, then go to the FHIR server and check for questionnaire response, and then see that we have a submission there and have a look at its rendering. So to put the data in, we're going to click Save as Final. We haven't made any changes, but it will still create an instance of that. It now tells us that we've done that and it's completed. And we will go back to the home page. If we don't know our way around, that's the easiest way. And we're going to go and visit the FHIR server. And in the FHIR server, we're looking for a questionnaire response. So if we click on this user interface will start listing questionnaire response instances. So we're going to search what's in the server. And we see that indeed there is one. We're going to have a read of it. And this user interface is very friendly. It gives us a rendering of the actual JSON file in a readable format. So we see that you see the commencement date is today 28/8/17 and it's currently 8/22. So that is definitely what we have added to the server. Now let's talk about a few other things that you could discover. So we've looked at the forms. We know that there's a form resource in the server, but how would you actually start editing or getting a feel for this? Well, that form server I showed you fortunately has a very nice feature that helps us with that. So if you triple click on the CSIRO icon in the corner, you will get a developer's playground. We're just going to have a look at that now. So here we are. And now let's go to the Easter egg. 1, 2, 3. Go to playground, debug mode enabled. Thank you, CSIRO. And that allows you to either drag in an existing JSON file that represents a form in the FHIR specification format, or you can go here and it will list from the attached server that it currently uses all the various things. You can then say, okay, so I've got that form, build that for me. And then it will allow you to see the form on the left and its source version on the right. So there you've got a really nice environment that you can use to start experimenting with those forms. And you can store them to the server as long as you've got rights. Good. That's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this little fuse box. There are a few links in the wrap-up that you may want to use. And then as a last step, we can shut down the system. So okay, so now for cleanliness, we're going to call down. You may find that that is not necessary, but we really want to do that because remember, we've been locking up some frequently used pods on localhost, and we want to free them up. So that's it for this. Finally, here are some links, and I'll see that I also post them alongside the slides and maybe in the bottom to the various channels that I use. Good. Thank you. Come again, plug in, light it up, build something interoperable. Until next time. Oh, and drop me an email if you have any questions.